Hi everyone, it's Clay Farris with MostlyMedicaid.com bringing you your news for our wonderful Medicaid world for July 24th, 2026. I've been out a couple weeks, had a bout of COVID, but doing well now. Happy Friday, happy Friday, happy Friday. It's good to be back in this episode. If you're new to the show, I'll do a news recap. I'll make some plugs for Job Hunter. We'll do acronym of the day, and we'll do Mission Possible. First up, don't forget, if you are following along in your LinkedIn peer groups, that we do the Intel Report each and every week. If you would like to see the detailed analysis of all these stories, we collect them, we highlight them, and we summarize them for you. And you can follow along in the show if you're wanting to read deeper. I'll call it the numbers of what we do, but make sure you are signed up for your peer group in LinkedIn if you're not already, because that's where you get those Intel reports. First up, we'll do MCO news. We're going to look at Centene exiting Arkansas. This is one more example of getting out when the gravy train that has been the ACA expansion rate cells is ending. A week or so ago, Centene announced a Doge-style fork in the road memo in which it's giving all 61 or 62,000 of its employees an opportunity to leave early, do some buyouts. And if you don't take it, you'll probably get laid off. That came after years of telling shareholders, of Centene telling shareholders, oh, it's all going to be okay. Don't worry. These Medicaid reform efforts are not going to hurt our Medicaid profiteering business. So in this week's news, we now see Centene saying, you know what? We're going to leave Arkansas also. If you're not familiar with the AR Home or Arkansas expansion model, basically they kind of hide it on the exchange. So they take Medicaid expansion monies and members and give them exchange-based coverage. Now, Centene has been involved in a couple places in Arkansas for a while, the exchange and in the passees. I'll talk about that more in a minute. But now with work requirements raining on the parade of ACA rate cells and the ending of the enhanced premium tax credits on Marketplace, Centene is basically saying, look, we can't make the money that we want to make here, so we're just going to take our toys and we're leaving. So if we look at a little bit more into the story itself, again, this is item 1 in your Intel report. If you want to read deeper, there's about 70,000 Arkansas Medicaid members that are going to have to switch plans now that Centene is leaving. And that's going to leave Blue Cross Blue Shield of Arkansas as the only insurer left in the AR Home model. That's their Medicaid expansion, but hidden on the exchange thing. If I remember right, that's going to trigger some regulatory problems because I think they have to have a few options. But I'm sure the state will work through that. As of now, there were 211,000 Arkansas Medicaid members in the Medicaid exchange expansion program. Centene products that are exiting are branded under Ambetter. They're still going to sell those products, just not to use for the Medicaid expansion piece. Remember, Centene never uses its own name anywhere. Centene is also not leaving the Passee program. That is the supposedly provider-led Arkansas Shared Savings Entities programs. It's going to continue to sell Ambetter products on the Marketplace, and they're going to stay in the Medicare business in Arkansas as well. Let's look at the next MCO news item. This is Miami Valley mental health providers struggling with CareSource's Medicaid recouping claims. This is Miami Valley in Ohio. We've been following this story of CareSource and friction with behavioral health providers for a few months now. Now, according to the mental health providers interviewed in this story, they say they were completely surprised when they got these repayment letters from CareSource. The letters go back proactively trying to get money back to 2024 and basically say, hey, look, we accidentally overpaid you guys. And it's going to reduce rates by 15%, I think, moving forward, in addition to retroactively trying to get this money back. Some of the providers interviewed in the story are saying, look, it's going to cost me up to $200,000. I think when we first covered this a few months ago, CareSource had sent these out and it started to get some press and they backed off it. If you guys remember, otherwise, let me know. I may have some COVID brain going on. And now it looks like it's back on again and they're trying to recoup these monies. Overall, I know it's an impact. It's a question of who's going to take the hit. To me, it's kind of cut and dry. I mean, if the MCO overpaid providers and the providers weren't supposed to get paid that much in the first place, if there's policies and stuff in place and rates in place, and we're asking MCOs and everybody to be a part of program integrity to better manage and oversee state and federal funds, to me, it's fairly cut and dry. They need to get this money back, but we'll see how it ends up because, of course, providers are going to use whatever political means they have. And I guess the real question is who ends up funding the overpayment? Most likely it's, as always, just going to be taxpayers. It's not going to be the providers. It's not going to be CareSource. It's not going to be the state. Let's move on to our next news grouping and look at tech news for this week. I got a couple things in tech news. First up is HHS Medicaid enrollee data blunder. This is item 5 in your Intel report. This ties to the story of data sharing between two federal agencies, that's HHS and ICE. And it's been covered a decent amount over the last few months. I think we're kind of down to the one last little thing that I think states can sue on. This includes, a string of judicial rulings. I think ultimately it said it's okay for these two agencies to do this. I think what we're looking at in this story is while there was a federal injunction out, some data got shared. But this is just, in general, some of the things that can go wrong with different actors sharing data. This comes out of Politico, this story. And there's new information in this lawsuit. 21 states have joined together, and they're suing HHS over some Department of Homeland Security receipt of basically ICE getting some of this data from CMS. There was a preliminary federal injunction in August of 2025 to stop the data sharing, and from what I can tell, this current lawsuit is related to some data that got shared kind of right after the injunction, maybe, and related for the states that are doing the suing. So I do think this, like everything, turns into a red state, blue state issue. Blue states are trying to sue over this maybe one data file that got shared while it was a little unclear about the federal injunction. According to DOJ, ICE actually never did anything with the data. They never ingested it. It wasn't used for any immigration enforcement. And now, after all this, HHS and ICE have formalized how they'll share data. They've been authorized that they can since all this, but including CMS put out a detailed notice in November in the Federal Register explaining what it will share with other federal agencies and its partners. Moving on, next item in tech news is item 12 in your Intel report. This is Gainwell's Provider Everywhere simplifies cross-state Medicaid provider enrollment. So really, we're just looking at a press release advertisement for Gainwell to get some visibility on some new stuff that it's doing. Remember, Gainwell basically runs every single MMIS in the nation, with a few exceptions. And now they're trotting out something called Provider Everywhere. They're saying they've worked with lots of different state Medicaid agencies to share validated provider information. And this is going to help states dealing with CMS now that CMS is enforcing program integrity rules, particularly around provider validation and revalidation. In addition to reducing credentialing work for providers who might be in multiple states, Gainwell saying this is going to be a big help to states to see providers that have been flagged or excluded in other places. And that last one's pretty important because one of the more embarrassing things in our Medicaid space is providers who end up on, say, the OIG exclusion list because they did something wrong. They get right back on the program, say in another state or just a year later, even in the same state, pretty easily. All this does seem sort of wise, what Gainwell's doing. If you look at what's been happening with provider revalidation requirements after the revelation of the massive frauds in Minnesota and California and other states. So I think CMS is going to keep poking at that, and this will probably help Gainwell's clients deal with this easier. And it does follow certain provider type patterns. Like in Minnesota, there's all those 14 provider categories that they keep focusing on. All right, let's move on to our next news item, pharmacy news item. We've got a couple in here, really two lawsuits. If you look at the first one, it's item 13 in your Intel report, moving on, looking at what happened with AstraZeneca in Texas. So this is Attorney General Paxton. He secures $34 million in AstraZeneca kickback settlement. Basically, according to the terms of the settlement, AstraZeneca provided free nursing services and money to doctors who are prescribing AstraZeneca products. So that's where the kickback comes in. They also pay to other companies, third-party companies, to send nurses and other providers to recommend AstraZeneca products to prescribers, to doctors. And they pretended like it was non-branded counseling, like they weren't there on behalf of AstraZeneca. So a lot of these costs ended up flowing back to Medicaid, paying for drugs, which is why Paxton was able to get $34 million out of them. The next pharma item is another lawsuit headline. Instead of a manufacturer, it's CVS. Remember Aetna CVS? This time it's CVS settling for $36.5 million over false Medicaid insulin claims. So over a 10-year period from 2010 to 2020, CVS intentionally overbilled Medicare, Medicaid, TRICARE, and the Federal Health Employees Benefits Programs by submitting false claims for insulin pens. It looks like what they were doing at scale was a claim would get rejected, saying it had too much day supply. They would resubmit it using a lower day supply. So what they were supposed to do was to get overrides, go through that process for larger insulin amounts. So 37 states have sued and are getting some of this settlement money. And it's this is an unusual part. CVS has actually taken responsibility for getting the money for refills that were not eligible, and for over dispensing and for falsifying the day's supply. Usually you won't see acknowledgement of guilt here. Basically, the CVS pharmacies, just to kind of recap, were distributing insulin in violation of different limits that were set by PBMs or Medicaid programs. And when they got caught, they just resubmitted claims and fake data on those claims. And it's costing them $36.5 million. Let's move on to our next news segment, where we're going to do a couple CMS news items. Item 19, in case you missed it in the last few weeks. This one, the headline is Enough is Enough. HHS OIG freezes funds for New York Medicaid Fraud Control Unit effective July 1. This is now the second Mafuku to be defunded following the removal of federal funding for Hawaii's Mafuku a couple weeks back. So HHS has frozen $60 million in annual funding for the New York Medicaid Fraud Control Unit. That's what Mafuku stands for. And saying that they haven't really been doing much to prosecute Medicaid, particularly around criminal and patient abuse cases. HHS says that the New York unit really focuses too heavily on civil cases, even though federal law requires Mafukus to be more active in investigating and prosecuting criminal fraud. So New York's going to stop getting federal money for their Mafuku effective July 1. That suspension extends through September 30th of this year, unless HHS sees New York taking immediate actions to show that it's even capable of carrying out its requirements under the laws related to Mafuku and funding. So New York's Mafuku has about 270 employees, and in recent years they're getting very, very few criminal indictments. For example, in fiscal year 23 and 2025, they only got like 8 or 9 criminal indictments, while other states of a similar size got hundreds. It is a reversal, this suspension, because HHS back in May had conditionally recertified New York's funding from Mafuku and said, but we want to do some more review. And after that review came in, they said, look, we actually have more concerns than we realized, and that the New York Mafuku was focused too much on high impact, complex civil fraud cases instead of criminal fraud and patient abuse. So for the policy wonks out there, if you want to see more details on exactly what New York Mafuku is violating, there's performance standards in Federal Register 76431, published back in September of 2024. And HHS has outlined 4 different performance standards that the Mafuku is not meeting, specifically standards 2, 4, 5, and 8. If you want to see more about those, check out item 19 in your Intel report. Before we move on, let's do item 20 in your Intel report. CMS soon to drop rule that may involve rescission of 80-20 provision. If you're not familiar, there's the Medicaid access rule that, and it has various things in it. One of them is this 80-20 staffing requirement, this provision that gets to home and community-based services. And it basically says that for those services, 80% of the payments need to be going to the person actually doing the care, like in the home, like the personal aide or homemaker or whoever it is. That should go to the providers themselves. As you can imagine, this pretty much greatly upsets the groups that are currently taking more than 20% of those payments for administrative costs. They don't want 80% of it going to the actual worker. So CMS is saying, hey, look, we're probably going to look at this rule again, and we're probably going to get rid of that 80-20 part. We're going to keep other parts. It covers lots of other things, like program integrity issues, oversight of managed care plans. So be on the lookout for that. That's been kind of a long-standing one that some folks have wanted to get rid of, the 80-20 rule, for a while. I personally am a big fan. Let's just do a quick overview of the types of things that showed up in the state news this week. We got several items in your Intel reports on work requirement rollouts. There's some stuff in Illinois about covering midwives. There's some more on the Mafuku scandals that I've talked, besides what I've already talked about. You're also going to see stuff about some states are trying to push large employers to pay for more of the Medicaid bill. In Colorado, you're going to see stuff related to transportation rates. You're going to see stuff in Ohio and Oklahoma and Pennsylvania. You can look at the map. The main thing is we covered lots of other things that I don't get to cover here each and every week. I want to point out, some of you are very interested in certain states. I think we covered a dozen or so other stories in other states in this week's Intel report. So make sure you check that out if you're interested in particular states. Also hitting the overview of the fraud that got reported. Remember, if you want to see those details, we put all those in there in the full curator pack in your Intel report, so you can see the full stories. You can see our highlights, our summarizing. So make sure you check that out if you want the details. Overall, this week we saw $196 million get reported in fraud in news outlets across the nation. If you dive in, you'll see stuff like Massachusetts transportation fraud. You'll see that CVS fraud I already talked about, the Texas one. Just my reminder always is you pay for every single bit of this. In addition to the harm to you as the taxpayer, there's almost always a physical harm to a member. I've been talking about this for 20 years. It's important that we're talking about it more and more now, and that things are finally being done about it. It's also important to pay attention to the folks that are claiming that it's just a politicized issue, or it's not that big, or that it's no big deal, that happens. Remember those folks. Those folks are really not to be trusted moving forward, because it is such a huge issue, and it's so long-standing, and it's really detrimental to improving anything for Medicaid members. The number one threat to Medicaid members is fraud, and then waste and abuse. Now let's hop into this week's guest segment. So excited for our guest for this week, and then after we do the guest segment, we'll come back and we'll do Job Hunter and other things to close out. All right, and up next, we're talking with Blake. Very excited about this. In the green room, I was telling Blake he's a hard man to get on the show. I've been trying for a couple of years. Really excited. Have been following his work for quite some time. I'll let Blake do a self intro however he wants. But for our audience, Blake is really just a widely recognized expert. I would say in the business of hospitals. I don't know if you would describe that in a similar way, but Blake, thank you for being here today. If you don't mind, do a quick self intro for folks that might not know you or your work, and then we'll kind of go through some of the stories you want to talk about today.
Yeah, and absolutely. And if you don't know me, why don't you? No, I'm just kidding. But also, before we start, I got to give you props for how quickly you were able to transition from the green room into your
Thank you.
Your game face. So that was impressive as a fellow creator. That was awesome.
Thank you.
But yeah, so I'm a former healthcare consultant by background. Did a lot of kind of like valuation work and transaction advisory for a firm called VMG Health. That was my former life. And now I do, I guess for lack of a better word, it varies based on who I talk to. But I call myself a content creator or an analyst or, a fake journalist, whatever you want to say. I just love writing and talking about the business of healthcare, as you described. And more specifically, I probably index a little more on provider organizations, so hospitals and health systems and health system transformation across, strategy and financial and innovative lenses, if that makes sense. So I've been doing that for about 4 years. Started up Hospitology in April of 2022. And from that point, grew it into what it is today across there's a membership platform and podcast that I just launched in January. And the newsletter's up to about, I think, 70,000 or so subscribers. So it's pretty fun. Crazy that I get to do it as a full-time job and talk to great folks like you for, a living. And that's the world I'm living in.
Thank you. Sorry, I had a coughing fit. I'm getting over COVID. That's why I went off.
Oh, I'm sorry to hear that. That's rough.
That's all right.
Take your time.
Thank you. Let's talk about this first article. I'll let you, as my voice recovers, I kind of let you talk about why you want to cover this. I'll give a couple thoughts, but I really want to hear yours on this one. Go ahead.
Sure. Yeah. So big news, Pearl Health, which is a company I've written about in the past, and I love writing and learning more about value-based care and that enablement space. They raised $110 million, and I think 60 million of that was in growth equity, and the other 50 was in debt. Don't remember the exact structure, but I think they're a super fascinating company to watch for a couple of reasons. The first one being, they're in Andreessen-backed, so they're kind of the darlings, right? But second of all, they've said they've reached profitability in 2025 and looking to grow off of a profitable base. And what I find particularly interesting within that is that they were born from this value-based care era of COVID, which were, very timely that you have COVID. I'm sorry to hear that. But this kind of value-based care era where we were in the land of free money, the land of milk and honey, where anybody and their dog could kind of raise, hundreds of millions of dollars, right? But Pearl is one of the companies that seems to have made it out of that era unscathed, especially kind of post 2022, 2023, when the new normal came back and the utilization started ramping up again. And so Pearl really interests me. They are at this kind of awesome inflection point of both enablement and value-based care and moving into Medicare Advantage. But also, we've heard a lot about this looming or ongoing era of AI orchestration, right? Where, these systems of intelligence, these agentic action layers are able to sit on the systems of record and, basically create these care team members that are agents, right? And presumably potentially lower the cost of care, create all of these new workflows, a lot of that happening behind the scenes in administrative workflows, but also on the clinical side with, potential co-pilots. And then also, would be remiss to mention things like risk adjustment and everything that kind of goes along with that as well. So I don't know. That's kind of more or less why I find Pearl a really interesting company. I think they have a lot of great people there. And, interested to continue following along, especially as CMS has the mandate, by 2030, everybody's going to be in an accountable care organization, right? It seems like that needs to be accelerated. And so in the proposed Medicare physicians fee schedule for 27, they're proposing, cutting some surgical or proceduralist reimbursement, RVUs, et cetera, and moving that over to primary care payments and ACO affiliations, and more reimbursement there. So I find that all very interesting and a lot of tailwinds for Pearl specifically.
Right.
So
it sounds
yeah.
so. It sounds like you. I don't want to put words in your mouth, but you like them because number one, they're not here from overnight. They've been around. They made it through the COVID, the big part of the COVID story. But also, it seems like they are rolling out some things that are kind of what I would call back office or basic blocking and tackling. Even some of this stuff even sounds like a closed loop referral system, but not necessarily just for plans, but maybe can do some other complex things around risk adjustment, which obviously there's a big reform effort there on the MA side. And maybe even some things that might be member facing. Did I get that right? Like this is not just another, we got some funding announcement, I guess.
That's exactly right. And I think something else that's interesting to note from these kind of more scaled, they call them AI native or technology forward companies like a Pearl, is you'll start to see this language shift from, hey, we focus on this population and do this deterministic thing, into a, hey, we can actually help you wherever you are on the risk spectrum. And we have these AI agents and these models that we can deploy that are flexible and adaptable to like your needs and optimize that current state for you and work along with you to help you kind of transform your operations into more a more technological focus, if that makes sense. With the ultimate goal, obviously, to be whatever your economic output is, right? So increased productivity, greater risk adjustment, lower cost, fewer hospitalizations, whatever that is in the value-based care or fee-for-service kind of spectrum. They're basically your technology partner. And I think a lot of other scaled platforms will follow suit with that language, if that makes sense.
It does. And it makes me want to dive a little bit deeper on, in your world, are you seeing a lot of, I don't know what the word is, but there's this whole new type of firm that runs in and says, we'll build agents for you. I think it's a bunch of people with cloud code. I liken it to like the software as a service or what Salesforce tries to convince. We'll come in and customize it. Do you see, to me, it makes a lot of sense to do that in a hospital environment. Is that really kind of taking off there? And if so, who are some of the leading or what are some of the things you're seeing related to that?
Yeah, it's almost like a build buy partner question, right? When it kind of boils down to the basic atom of that. And so what I, in my opinion, healthcare is local. Healthcare is very nuanced, and you need a lot of customization or flexibility in what you build. And so that forward deployed model where you have engineers not just vibe coders, right? But like you need like talented individuals who are able to build what you need from a customization perspective, right? And so I think, yes, to your point, a lot of people have copied that kind of Palantir model where people you go into, you sit in the boardroom, you shadow doctors, you shadow nurses, whatever the workflow is, whatever the need is, and create something that can drive better automation or cost savings or whatever the end goal is, greater satisfaction, retention. And a lot of those revolve around like various labor heavy aspects or burdensome manual tasks, right? Document retrieval, pre-charting, patient intake, scheduling, OR throughput. All of those things are very nuanced challenges, and every hospital or health system has potentially a different standard of care or what protocols, all those sorts of things. So in my opinion, like the greater customization and flexibility you can develop, in tandem with a partner that has taste and experience, I think those are going to be the differentiating factors in the AI world of tomorrow, health system 2.0, the better.
Thank you. I'll move us on from this one, but thank you for the insights on that. The next one, we're talk about Oklahoma. This gets us Oklahoma hospitals seek funding clarity amid Medicaid payment shift. So it looks like the directed payment program, which I don't know, it's got to be a big thing in your world, certainly a big thing in mine, is going to go down about $1 billion, from $1 billion to $872 million in the next fiscal year. It looks like there may be some other financing mechanisms to offset this, but I'll let you kind of walk us through what you see as the important stuff in there.
Yeah. And so admittedly, this is on the edge of my wheelhouse, but it's an area I'm trying to learn a lot more about. So honestly, you might have some insights here that could help me out as well. But really what attracted me to this article in particular is the macro going on behind what's happening in Oklahoma. And so, right. So you have, Medicaid work requirements, you have ACA disenrollments, and more people every day are aging into Medicare and Medicare Advantage out of employer-sponsored health insurance, right? And so, what does that all boil down to? More or less, that's essentially payer mix deterioration over time. So there's a secular headwind for hospitals and health systems where you have this declining commercial base and increasing uninsured. And so that hits you in a few different ways, right? And so if you have fewer Medicaid enrollees walking through your doors, you have fewer inpatient Medicaid days, right? And those sorts of things. And that makes you potentially less eligible, or knocks you out of consideration for eligibility for, state supplemental payments or disproportionate share payments and those sorts of things. And that also has tie-ins to, 340B program and other things as well. So within that space, there's a lot of lack of oversight as to like how those funds are dispersed and those sorts of things. But also, it's very hard to model from a financial perspective. And so there's a lot of uncertainty right now with how that's going to play out, how many people are going to actually be uninsured, can we get them re-enrolled, like all those things. So yeah, curious for your thoughts on that.
I mean, at a very high level, just state directed payments for folks that don't know, CMS allows for hospitals predominantly, but other groups to get lots more cash than what goes through the official claim system. I'm highly simplifying here, but one of those ways is you can put billions of dollars in a brown paper bag and tell your health plan to go give it to your hospital. That's state directed payments. And there is some reform on this, because what we've found is a lot of times there are hospitals getting 300% of Medicare rates. You've got this normal kind of dialectic that Medicaid payments aren't enough, but you start adding up all these other things, you see examples like that. And so now under HR 1 and under the regs that are promulgated, to articulate out the details of HR 1, state directed payments are getting trimmed back, and there's different rules for expansion states, non-expansion states, and all these have to get approved by CMS. They're kind of like one-off deals or whatever. But in this example, I think you laid out the context in a helpful way, because basically you've got hospitals, in this case Oklahoma, saying, okay, we know it's going to be a hit. Tell us who's taking the worst hit or whatever. It seems like they want to get some numbers on record of, okay, what's next to our name for this year. And of course then they can launch lobbying and all that kind of stuff to help change the math. Some other time I'll have to tell you about a calculation I was involved in as a young analyst for ambulance, essentially ambulance extra payments. But I mean, that's my take. That makes sense. I mean, and I would, if I'm a hospital in any market, I would start to want to say, okay, it's coming, and we need you guys to start writing down some details of what it's going to be at the facility level.
Yeah, absolutely. And one more note, kind of on just like broader, kind of ACA disenrollment, Medicaid disenrollment trends is HCA healthcare, which is like the unicorn health system, most profitable, largest health system in America, for profit, publicly traded. They had like certain estimates around like, hey, ACA enrollments are probably going to be this bad. This is what we were expecting. And then that number came in worse than they were expecting. So they put out like a pre-release number for Q2. And so as you can imagine, like affordability becomes a big issue. And then the question mark is, how does this all play out economically? Like probably the operating environment gets worse before it gets better, at least in 27.
Oh yeah. And you may think of HCA. Years ago, I did employer benefits consulting for employers, and most of them were large hospital employers. So I had HCA, had Tenet, had Baylor and Scott and White for the merge, all that kind of stuff. People don't realize how big HCA is. I mean, they just on their employee benefit spend, it was like $2 billion a year.
Wow, is that right?
Yeah. So I mean, any of this, there's going to be some that are massive hits, especially to the larger systems. Let's do the last one. So map shows 26 states suing Trump over Medicaid rule. And this may even tie into what you're talking about with HCA, but I mean, this particular lawsuit is going to get into I think the medical frailty definitions. I believe that, yeah. I mean, the general dialogue is people are going to lose coverage because of paperwork, that kind of stuff. But really what it is if there's ways to get exemptions to demonstrating compliance with the law passed. And one of them is medical frailty. And maybe early June, CMS published some rules that some of the states weren't expecting. But anyway, that's sort of my overall summary of it. But what do you want to cover on this one?
Yeah, just more or less kind of more of the same context around, hey, here's another data point to kind of prove out future disenrollments on the horizon. Like this can only hurt enrollment levels for both payers and providers, right? There's another administrative step. States are suing. There's a lot of red tape involved. Anytime there's any sort of change like that from a regulation perspective, it takes a while to play out. And so net, we're going to come out lower than expected. And so, what does that mean? You're going to have a higher proportion of uninsured populations coming through your doors, maybe cash pay. That's going to hurt your collections. It's going to hurt your balance sheet. And, where do you go from there? So a lot of hospitals and health systems, I imagine, are modeling out worst case scenarios from that context.
I think I've got one question for you on this, and then I got the big question of how full of is Clay Farris scale 1 to 10. But I mentioned in the green room we do have some clients that are also operating hospital systems, health plans, or whatever. And I would say, a year ago, back when I was just looking at before HR1 was even a law, but I kind of had line of sight into some E&C committee stuff in Congress. I'm like, look, these things are coming, and you need to start modeling how much, if you have to go fight for DISH versus SDPs versus whatever, like you need to start doing this math. And they really didn't believe it. Like they really, because this type of change hasn't happened in so long. I mean, I think everybody is believing it now, but do you see in general the hospital world sort of having pivoted into okay, now we need to be estimating impact, or is there still like a cohort that's kind of in denial? What's your take on that?
Yeah, I feel like there's kind of two schools of thought where I feel like in general a lot, because reimbursement and like the zero sum game, or some even call it like a negative sum game with government kind of clawing back. But it's very easy to be negative and cynical in healthcare, right? So I've talked to some folks who are just like, yeah, there's nothing we can do. We're going to have to figure out how to cut back our expenses, close certain service lines, whatever that is, model out doomsday scenarios. And then there's the other camp that's like, maybe three camps. The second camp being, we're going to wait for midterms or the next presidential election and hope it all just moves the other direction, right? Because in my opinion, I think healthcare will be number one or number two issue when it comes to that election, given kind of affordability and how polls are trending. And they might have changed since the last time I saw them, but I don't know. I think healthcare will continue to be in the limelight from that perspective. And then the third camp is, hey, okay, this is our reality. So how are we going to make sure our teams, our organizations are nimble to be able to adapt to this new environment? Can we get more profitable on Medicare patients? We're going to expect to hit to the top line. So where can we thoughtfully deploy AI, or where can we get quick wins as far as, outsourcing certain things or whatever it is, to cut costs? Because what else can you do? And maybe there's some revenue diversification strategy within that as well. Maybe you see more employers start to work with health systems to do direct contracting, or maybe there's more value-based care plays, or whatever it is. I think that's kind of what you'll see play out, is how can we expand our revenue base as much as possible. And a lot of that could be upcoding, right? Like AI-enabled upcoding is a thing, right? A lot of people will say, no, it's more accurate documentation, which, yes, of course, but with more accurate documentation comes greater propensity to code everything. Right. So, more or less, that's kind of how I see the landscape playing out, if that makes sense.
Thank you. I really appreciate being here today. All right, final question. Scale of 1 to 10, how full of it is Clay Farris?
Man, I think you're like a 2. I don't think you're that full of it. You said you've been doing this for so long. You got to have some thick skin, and you're not afraid to put your thoughts out there. But also, you explain things, you explain concepts well, and there was that, quiet confidence. So I don't know. I get a good vibe from you, Clay.
We got to get to know each other better. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it, Blake. Hope to have you back again soon. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. Thanks for the time.
All right, and up next, we've got Dr. Alex Bu of City Block. He's joined the show today for Medicaid on the Brain. Really excited to have you here. If you don't mind, Alex, do a quick self-intro for anybody in our audience may not be familiar with your work, and then we'll go talk about the stories that you had picked you want to talk about today.
Sure. Well, thanks for having me here, Clay. So yes, my name's Alex Bu. I'm an internal medicine physician, and I've really focused my career on answering one big question, which is, why does the healthcare system consistently fail the people who need it the most? And what does it take to fix that? I trained and practiced at Johns Hopkins in East Baltimore, spent time at the CMS Innovation Center, worked on things like the Accountable Health Communities model, the first payment model really focused on testing, screening, and addressing social needs. Then went to Louisiana, led the Office of Public Health, ran the COVID response, but also set up the first subscription model for hepatitis C treatment. We got nearly 20,000 people treated through that model. And then I spent 5 years, most recently at United Healthcare, as their, amongst other roles, Chief Medical Officer for government programs, where we cover 20 million Medicare, Medicaid, and dual eligible members. But today, I'm really proud and happy to be the Chief Health Officer at City Block, which is a care delivery organization. We serve more than 100,000 Medicaid and dual eligible members, mostly with complex needs across 11 markets, and under largely value-based contracts with 15 payer partners. So we deliver integrated behavioral, physical, and social care through community-based teams, virtual care, and all under a value-based structure. So we get really happy about ensuring that we're giving the right clinical care to the right people to help drive them towards better health. And that's kind of the background that'll take me through our discussion today.
Thank you. Now, if I would have known you were a Hopkins grad, I would have rejected the interview. I'm just kidding. I did a Hopkins public health degree years ago as well. So cool to meet a fellow. There's a bunch of us running around the Medicaid space. First story: Arkansas has begun a soft launch of Medicaid work requirements. What does that mean? Arkansas at a real high level setup. Arkansas was one of several states: Arkansas, Nebraska, somebody else I'm forgetting. They kind of said, we want to get out in front of this and we want to be one of the first ones to this. Whereas on the other hand, you got a lot of blue states saying we don't have enough information, or we're not wanting to rush this. What do you want to talk about in this particular Arkansas story?
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting story to be watching. So, by the beginning of 27, following OB3 or HR1, whichever name you prefer. States are going to be putting in place these work requirements. We're starting to see now federal guidance on what they think the eligibility requirements should look like. There's still a comment period open. But I think it's interesting to look at these states, like you said, Arkansas in this article, Nebraska, a couple of others that are starting things early to see, what kind of implementation challenges can we anticipate, but also, how do we see this playing out? I think for me, one of the most interesting things will be this idea of auto verification, and I think that'll be really telling for us to tell or to see, how big are the impacts of these systems. So I know we and I will be watching very carefully to see, over the next 6 months, how many people are auto verifying, how many people are they having to go to ask for paperwork, because the big concern obviously is filling that paperwork, getting that paperwork through, again, as a former state bureaucrat, a bureaucratic state system, that's fraught with challenges. Yeah. We know the data really shows most people probably already meet these requirements.
Right. And I still don't have a good answer to this question. Why can't we just patch into the Department of Labor stuff, right? Or the same systems we have this data outside of whatever small subset of people that aren't working, whatever the word is, over the table or whatever. That should be really easy to prove, is that someone's working X, Y, and Z on payroll systems or whatever. And I just don't see people running to that about yep, you know what? We bolted on our this reporting to that reporting, and we just made it easy for 95% of the people. But I don't know. Why do you think that is? Like, why are we not leveraging that kind of stuff?
Well, it's the magic of Medicaid is that every state is different. So you're dealing with, every state's policies being slightly different. I'll say, we did quarterly eligibility checks in Louisiana when I was down there between 2018 and 2020. And there were some challenges with just sort of getting those state systems to work together. I think, a bigger issue is one, there's a significant group of folks who will be exempt from these requirements in the first place because they're, pregnant people, or they, have a disability, or they're caring, for somebody else. And that's not going to be, seen in that system. I think two, even for employed people, I think a significant number of the people in this Medicaid population may not be, in a salaried environment. And frankly, some of them have hour variation. And so I think that's actually one of the things I'm interested to see in Arkansas is, how are they going to look at, month to month variation? The requirement's 80 hours across a month. But depending on, people, getting enough hours and some of that, out of their control, those kinds of finer details are where I think things get gummed up. And again, back to where I started, it's how, efficiently can the state's bureaucratic system really look at that data and fairly adjudicate. And I think, we've got examples like Georgia that show that it's tough and expensive to do this.
One more kind of thread on this. Have you you've been following the medical frailty definition piece for the exemptions or whatever? I don't know which one will be harder to prove, either that I'm working 80 hours or that I've got medical frail. Both of those are kind of sticky wickets. But my question for you on the medical frailty piece is, to me, those are all opportunities to get them in a better eligibility category anyway, right? What do you think of that statement?
I would tend to agree with some of that. I think it's a double-edged sword. So again, I'm coming at it from, our background as a value-based care company. At one sense, especially for Medicaid, we know that engagement in care is some of the lowest amongst Medicaid populations. So I like the idea of it's an incentive for people to get, see a primary care provider once a year, make sure that we have all of their information up to date so that we're getting them care that they may need, that they may not know they need. On the other end, the requirements, the paperwork that's going to be driven through this is not only, administrative burden potentially for the providers, but it could lead to some duplicative care or some unnecessary care being provided just for the sake of being able to adequately document these frailty requirements. I think it's ambiguous. Like I said, the comment period is open right now for CMS. It'll be interesting to see how CMCS, adjudicates and gives clarity, or if they give clarity. But I think it's a double-edged sword, I would say.
Yeah, there's no way it's not going to be disruptive. It's a major change at massive. Yeah. I'm thinking on the other side of it, I think we could see people that are like, oh, you didn't realize it, but because we did this, like AAA's assess people for waivers and stuff all the
Yeah.
time. Oh, you should be on this waiver and this, get all these other, things that are really more appropriate than just in this general adult expansion. I don't think many people are thinking that way. I'm just saying, I think there may be some people that get way more services ultimately if we can get them in the right group, but I don't know. I don't know where that
Well, but I think you hit the nail on the head with the word disruption. I think that if we zoom out, the bigger picture is like, I think both sides of the aisle, everybody agrees health spending's, out of control and we don't want to create more cost. There's this concern of fraud, waste, and abuse, but I think you got to make sure that the treatment is not worse than the cause. And I worry not only about sort of the, disruption, somebody losing their healthcare access because we care about longitudinal care, but we know that it actually drives health costs up, right? So somebody who now has to turn the emergency room or go to the hospital for emergent care that could have been handled better drives costs up. And then administration rather of a policy like this is costly in and of itself. And so it's like, are we compounding costs while, exacerbating health concerns when I think we all wanted something instead that just kept people healthy and helped people, get off or get, gainful employment and be healthy, happier.
Thank you. Indiana, we're still on work requirements, but we've got, their agency. I know that's their HHS agency. I can't remember what it stands for. It's like financial services or something like that. They shared their work requirement rules. I guess more details about how they're going to do it. A 3-month look back. And it's not, and I guess one thing I'm bad about this. It's not just working, right? You could be working, you could be volunteering, or I think going to school or something like that. But what's your take on this Indiana one?
I mean, I think, so there's, 3 similar articles that I kind of linked together. I think similar issues. Indiana is interesting because they're actually going a little bit more stringent than the federal program. So they're expecting a larger population disenrolled. I think, Arkansas is estimating that, this program would probably lose about 40,000 people. 40,000 people would lose their eligibility. In Indiana, we're talking, more than 100,000 people losing their eligibility based off their own, estimates. Again, I think it'll be interesting to see as they lean into trying to get this more stringent program off the ground faster. Does the program operate as they expect, and does it make sense for them financially? I think they are going to have to hire a number of people. I think actually a pretty significant number of people to help them operate this program. Again, it gives me a reflection back to Georgia and just the significant administrative costs, which were more than double than the savings for the program.
I wonder, I guess the state can make it more stringent. I guess that's right. Is that in general?
Yeah, because they set them, within constraints, right? The Medicaid
Right.
law is very complex, but within constraints, they can set eligibility requirements. And I think, that's probably what we're going to see, frankly, across the country, right? Is you're going to see some states that are going to try to bend over backwards to minimize the impact of these requirements while meeting the letter of the law that CMCS has set out. I think you're seeing other states that have frankly been trying to figure out how they can, navigate this population and maybe constrain this population for a while, and they'll sort of lean into this space. Indiana calls out they've got 90% funding FMAP for this population, so the costs are already somewhat constrained, and now they're hiring a whole bunch of people to administer this program. It makes you worry, that it's sort of not going to be a sustainable program for them.
So what do you predict for February 1? Because I mean, January, this is the law of the land, right? I mean, this disruption is going to happen. What do you predict is going to happen, like, in terms of the actual impact?
Well, so that's actually an interesting call out. So in Indiana, they're now saying they're going to look retrospectively at 3 months of employment history. So even January 1, they'll have people who they'll be looking back into 26 and saying, did they meet requirements before this program was ever, implemented? I mean, again, I'm very concerned about seeing large numbers of people lose their access. For us, as a primary care provider, my concern is, especially people with chronic conditions, we need to make sure that they maintain stable, access to care, stable access to medications. Medicaid, does that well with low cost share and access to programs like ours. As we see people getting gummed up in the works largely because of paperwork, right? So previous studies have shown, something like 92% of people meet these requirements as they're described, these estimates are many more than 92% of people not, getting through the pathway. As we see these people lose eligibility, but still, have health needs and frankly, still be eligible but not enrolled, that's a concern for me. We're going to see, I think, some signs of increased ED utilization, healthcare costs going up at a pretty bad time for that.
So you said you're a recovering health plan executive, right?
Recovering Fed, recovering state guy,
Right.
and recovering health plan. Yeah.
I want to think for a minute. Like most people are very clear, like all these bad things will happen. So let's just say they happen, right? January 1, February 1, whatever. It seems like instead of spending our time like saying these bad things are going to happen, they're going to happen, they're going to happen, we should be figuring out, well, what do we do to pick up the pieces? Right. And to me, that shouldn't there be people like standing up free clinics everywhere or whatever? Aren't we foregoing some sort of treatment of the issue that we say is absolutely going to happen?
Yeah, well, I would say I don't think free clinics are going to be a cure for the situation because generally that sort of two-tiered system has not fared well historically.
Right.
But yeah, I mean, for instance, my organization, City Block, we're very focused on, just as we were during redetermination, making sure that we helped membership, that, met eligibility requirements, maintain their status. Organizations like ours will be leaning into this space through our social care work. How can we help people make sure that their paperwork is done?
Right.
I think we will put the best efforts in that. I think you'll see the health plans try to do that too. I think even with that, there will be people who, just fall through the cracks and lose access to care. From a health plan perspective, your concern is that you're going to see people who are otherwise largely healthy say, hey, this is not worth it. I'm not going to reapply, even though they are eligible and should be in the system. And what that does is make the insurance pool sicker and sicker and then care and insurance more costly for everybody in the state. So I think it can have some pretty negative impacts even for the plans.
Right. Yeah, I think that's where I want to start having people think about, okay, well, then what are we going to do about it? Right. Because I think there's like this implied, if we talk about how bad we think it might be, maybe it won't happen. It's happening. I mean, I've been doing this for like 20 years and the courts are not going to be the remedy. There's a couple of Hail Marys on some very smaller pieces of this. But I think, and I'm just kind of talking to myself, but I think that's where I'm going to try to start moving the dialogue to, okay, it's going to happen. All those things that you're concerned about will happen. What are you going to do about it? And you gave an answer. You're like, well, we're going to lean into.
We're going to try to fill out the paperwork.
Yeah. Yeah. Anything else you want to cover on these today?
No, that's great.
Thank you for being here. You got to answer the questions. Scale of 1 to 10. How full of it is Clay Farris?
I'd say that was a very fair conversation. So we'll go with 3.
I want higher numbers. Thank you. Thank you so much for being. I really appreciate you being here today. Hope to have you back again sometime. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Clay.
Quick plug for Job Hunter. Don't have time to cover all these in details, but in each of your intel reports, you get detailed analysis about roles you may want to be on the lookout for. If you're interested in making a move in your next career move, our team pulls all of those as well. So make sure you check that out in your intel report for this week. And let's do a couple items in grab bag, then we'll do closeout. Let's do acronym of the day. Today's acronym of the day is Mafuku. It's always fun to say when I do talks at conferences and stuff. I always throw this one out there in the acronym game that I'll play with the crowd. It stands for Medicaid Fraud Control Unit. So these are basically law enforcement team. A lot of times you'll see a part like the data analysis part. You'll see it in the Medicaid agency itself or the HHS agency, and they will coordinate with other state agencies. What I always explain to people is sometimes they'll usually coordinate with whoever can carry guns in the state. Like in Georgia, that'd be the Georgia Bureau of Investigation. GBI, because sometimes they got to go do stuff that involves knocking down provider doors. They can investigate and prosecute, so they're going to go to court as well. If you want to, if you're watching the video, you may want to pause this to look at the acronym of the day if you want to see more of the details here. And these are important to talk about now because you can see CMS has been saying, wait a minute, have you guys been doing your job? This is the who audits the auditors question. And so far, we've got 2 that have been found to not. So I think we're going to see more and more of that. But this is Medicaid Fraud Control Unit. This is MFUCU. Make sure you hit pause and check out more of the details of the acronym of the day. The team does these amazing infographics. Next up, let's do Mission Possible, and then we'll get you out of here for this week. So Mission Possible is go outside. And for folks that watch the show, I do some version of this pretty often. I really believe in getting outside, fresh air, sunlight, touching grass. I know for me, I mentioned at the top of the show, getting over some COVID, we were very blessed to have some unusually mild weather. I was able to sit out on our porch, a whole bunch of storms and rain and just cooler weather and breezes. So I am very grateful for being able to get outside. Definitely do that this weekend. You will be amazed at how much just even half an hour for maybe a walk in your neighborhood or whatever it is you like to do in your yard, what that will do for your soul. So that's it for this week. Until next time, thank you so much for all that you do in the Medicaid space. I hope this show is helpful for you to kind of stay on top of things, maybe building some awareness about some things that are going on in the broader Medicaid world. Thank you for all the work that you do in your part of it. Until next time, I'm Clay Farris. I'll see you on the next episode of Medicaid on the Brain.